Ambassador Torin sat alone on the bridge of his diplomatic cruiser and stared at the wall of darkness ahead. Somewhere beyond that darkness was Earth. Somewhere behind that wall of silent satellites and weapons platforms and patrol ships was a species that had not spoken a single word to the rest of the galaxy in 6 years. He had come 13 times before. 13 times he had carried messages of peace and cooperation and friendship. 13 times he had been turned away without hearing a single human voice. Now he was here for the 14th time, and deep in his chest he already knew the answer would be the same. His communication officer tried again. She sent the message on every frequency the ship could reach. The words were carefully chosen by the finest diplomats on Valith Prime. They spoke of shared futures and mutual respect, and the desire for open dialogue. The message traveled across the void and hit Earth's outer communication array. A few seconds later, a response came back. It was the same response that had come back every single time for 6 years. A cold, flat, automated voice that said, "Earth acknowledges your transmission. No reply will follow." Torin closed his eyes and leaned back in his chair. He did not understand. Nobody in the galaxy understood. Far away on Valith Prime, the capital world of the Galactic Council, High Arbiter Lunora stood before the Great Assembly Chamber. 43 species had seats in this room. For 12,000 years, the Council had governed the galaxy from this very hall. Wars had been ended here. Trade routes had been drawn. Entire civilizations had been shaped by the decisions made in these ancient walls. And now, for the first time in all those thousands of years, the Council was afraid of silence. Lunora raised her thin hand, and the chamber went quiet. Her skin was pale like paper, and her eyes were deep black pools that had seen empires rise and fall. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of centuries. "Humanity has refused our 14th diplomatic contact," she said. "For 6 standard years, they have not responded to any transmission, any offer, any invitation. They do not trade with us. They do not negotiate with us. They do not threaten us. They simply do not speak to us. This is not acceptable." Murmurs rolled through the chamber. Representatives from dozens of worlds shifted in their seats. Some were angry, some were confused, a few were quietly terrified. Because in 12,000 years of galactic history, no species had ever simply refused to participate. Every species that the Council contacted either submitted to its authority or fought against it. Both outcomes could be managed. Both outcomes had protocols. Silence had no protocol. After the session ended, Lunora walked through the private corridors of the Council's inner sanctum and entered a sealed room where Keeper Seleth was waiting. Seleth was the head of the Council's archive and its most secret operations. She was small and sharp-eyed, and she never smiled. On the table between them was a document that officially did not exist. It was called the Containment Directive. "The silence is becoming a problem," Lunora said. "The silence was always going to be a problem," Seleth replied. "We designed the directive assuming humanity would continue to engage with us. Every clause depends on their participation. Trade restrictions only work if they trade. Border agreements only work if they acknowledge borders. We cannot contain a species that refuses to even look at us." Lunora sat down heavily. "Then we must find a way to make them look." On the other side of the galaxy, deep beneath the mountains of the Korean Peninsula on Earth, a different kind of meeting was taking place. The room was cold and lit by pale blue lights. Around a long steel table sat the most powerful humans alive. At the head of the table was Teho. He was not a tall man. He was not loud or dramatic. He had a calm face and steady eyes, and he spoke in a voice so quiet that people had to lean forward to hear him. He had been a ground soldier once, a long time ago. He had fought in the border skirmishes when alien raiding parties tested human colony defenses. He had never lost a single engagement. Not one. And now he commanded every warship, every soldier, and every weapon that humanity possessed. Beside him sat Hana. She was the chief intelligence director, and she was the reason they were all sitting in this room instead of sitting at a negotiation table being lied to. 2 years ago, her agents had broken into the deepest layers of the Council's encrypted archives. What they found changed everything. Hana activated the display screen, and the containment directive appeared in full. Every person in the room had read it before, but Taeho made them read it again every time they met. He wanted them to remember. He wanted the anger to stay fresh. The document was long and detailed, and written in the cold language of bureaucracy. But certain lines stood out like knives. Humanity is to be reclassified as a Tier 3 developmental species. That meant they were not considered equals. They were considered children who needed to be managed. Expansion beyond approved boundaries will trigger corrective intervention. That meant if humans colonized too far, the Council would attack them. And the worst line of all, buried deep in the final section. In the event of non-compliance, sterilization of human core worlds is authorized as a final corrective measure. Sterilization. They meant the destruction of Earth. They meant the killing of every man, woman, and child on humanity's homeworld. And this document had been written not during a war, not in response to any threat, but during the same years that the Council was smiling at human diplomats and talking about peace and friendship. Taeho looked at Sujin. She sat at the far end of the table. She had once been Earth's lead diplomat. She had spent 8 years of her life building relationships with alien species, learning their languages, studying their cultures, believing with her whole heart that humanity could earn its place among the stars through patience and goodwill. She had been wrong. Your assessment? Taeho asked. Sujin looked at the document on the screen. Her face was still. Her voice was flat. They never wanted peace, she said. They wanted obedience. I will not make that mistake again. Taeho nodded. The decision had been made long ago, but he confirmed it once more. Earth would remain silent. No response to the Council. No communication of any kind. Because every word they had ever spoken to the Council had been used against them. Every handshake had been a chain. Every treaty had been a trap. So they stopped talking. And in the silence, they started building. Far away, at the edge of human space, Torin still sat on his bridge. His ship floated in the dark. Around him, Earth's defense grid hummed with quiet power. He looked at the sensor readings and felt something cold settle in his stomach. 6 years ago, when humanity first went silent, their border defenses had been modest. A few hundred ships, some orbital platforms, standard technology. But now, as his sensors swept across the boundary of human space, he counted thousands of ships. Weapons platforms of designs he had never seen. Energy signatures that his computer could not identify. In 6 years of silence, while the Council debated and argued and sent polite messages into the void, humanity had been building a wall of iron and fire that stretched across the stars. Torin turned his ship around and began the long journey back to Valith Prime. He had no message to deliver. He had no words of hope. He had only a feeling, deep and cold and certain, that the galaxy had made a terrible mistake, and that the silence was not an ending. It was a beginning. 6 years before the silence began, Sujin had believed in the galaxy. She had believed in it the way a child believes in the goodness of the world, completely and without doubt. She stood in the grand hall of Orith Kale, the neutral station where the Galactic Peace Summit was held, and she looked around at the representatives of 100 worlds, and she thought, this is the moment. This is when humanity takes its place among the stars. She had worked for months on the proposal. Fair borders that gave humanity room to grow without threatening anyone. trade agreements that would benefit both sides equally. A technology sharing program focused on medicine so that human and alien doctors could save lives together. It was reasonable. It was generous. It was everything a peaceful species could offer. She stood before the assembly and presented her case. She spoke clearly and carefully. She had learned 3 alien languages for this moment. She used their customs of respect and their traditions of greeting. She saw some of the delegates nod. She saw others lean forward with interest. When she finished, High Arbiter Lunora herself rose and spoke. "Your passion is admirable," Lunora said. "Humanity's desire for cooperation is noted and appreciated. We will consider your proposal with the seriousness it deserves." Sujin returned to Earth with hope burning in her chest. She told the War Council that progress was being made. She told them to be patient. She told them that the galaxy would come around. She believed every word she said. She did not know that 3 hours after she left Orith Kale, the Council held a closed session. She did not know that Lunora stood before that closed session and said, "The humans are eager and naive. This is useful." She did not know that the Council voted unanimously to reject every single part of her proposal. She did not know that in that same session, they passed Amendment 1172, a secret resolution that reclassified humanity as a species too dangerous to be allowed freedom, and authorized the Containment Directive to ensure humans never grew beyond the Council's control. She did not know any of this until Hana told her. Hana had never trusted the Council. Where Sujin saw opportunity, Hana saw patterns. She noticed that every trade deal offered to humanity contained hidden restrictions. She noticed that the borders proposed by the Council always cut humanity off from the richest resource systems. She noticed that every time human scientists made a breakthrough, the Council would suddenly offer a better alternative that came with strings attached. So Hana did what Hana did best. She sent her agents into the dark places where the Council kept its secrets. It took 2 years. 2 years of careful, patient, dangerous work. Her agents infiltrated the Council's archive on Valith Prime. They cracked encryption systems that were older than human civilization. They copied files that were never meant to be seen by anyone outside the Council's inner circle. And when Hana finally sat down to read what they had found, she did not move for 7 hours. The Containment Directive was not a short document. It was a detailed, methodical plan for the slow destruction of human independence. Phase 1 was economic. The Council would offer humanity trade deals that seemed fair, but were designed to make human colonies dependent on alien supply chains. Phase 2 was military. The Council would impose fleet size restrictions on humanity under the guise of galactic safety standards. Phase 3 was territorial. The Council would engineer border disputes between humanity and neighboring species, forcing humans to fight small wars that would drain their resources. And Phase 4, the final phase, was the one that made Hana's blood run cold. If all other phases failed, the Council was authorized to destroy Earth and every human colony world. They called it sterilization. They wrote about it in the same calm, bureaucratic language that they used to discuss trade tariffs and shipping routes. Hana brought the documents to Taiho. He read them in silence. Then he called the full War Council together, and he called Sujin. Sujin walked into the room and saw the faces of every military leader on Earth staring at her. She saw the document on the screen. She started reading. With every line, something inside her changed. The hope that had sustained her for 8 years did not break all at once. It crumbled slowly, like a building falling in on itself, floor by floor, until there was nothing left but dust. When she finished reading, the room was silent. Taiho watched her. She reached up and removed the diplomatic insignia from her collar. It was a small silver pin in the shape of 2 hands clasping across a field of stars. She had worn it every day for 8 years. She placed it on the table with a soft click. "I would like to transfer to the Psychological Warfare Division," she said. Her voice did not shake. Her eyes were dry. "I know how they think. I know how they speak. I know what they fear. Let me use that." Taeho nodded, and from that day forward, Sujin never spoke of peace again. In the present day, Torin returned to Valith Prime with nothing. The council chamber was tense. Lunora sat on her throne and listened to reports from across the galaxy. The silence was spreading, not the silence of humanity, but a different kind of silence. Other species were starting to ask questions. The Rylothi Confederation, a proud and independent group of worlds, had begun publicly questioning the Council's approach to humanity. Why were the humans so quiet? What had the Council done to make an entire species refuse to speak? The Orvani Republic, known for their philosophers and their sense of justice, had gone further. They had withdrawn their ships from all patrols near human space. They said they would not participate in any action against a species that had shown no aggression. Lunora felt the ground shifting beneath her. She had ruled the Council for centuries by controlling information and managing fear. But she could not control what she could not understand, and she could not understand the silence. In her private chamber, Keeper Seleth presented a new plan. "We must force a response," Seleth said. "If humanity will not speak, we must create a situation where they have no choice. I propose we deploy a survey fleet near one of their colony worlds, large enough to be seen as a threat, but officially designated as scientific. If they respond with force, we have justification for the directive. If they respond with words, we have an opening to manipulate." Lunora considered this for a long time. "And if they do not respond at all?" Seleth paused. She had not considered that possibility. In 12,000 years of galactic history, no species had ever failed to respond to a fleet on its doorstep. "They will respond," she said. "They must." Lunora approved the plan. Meanwhile, deep in the cold void of space, the ENS Silent Hammer moved without a sound. Captain Wanjin sat in his command chair and read his new orders from Taeho. He was to shadow the Council's incoming fleet and observe without being detected. Beside him, young Officer Dohyun looked troubled. "Sir," Dohyun said, "why do we not simply warn them to stay away? One message, one clear statement. It would be enough." Wanjin looked at the young man. Dohyun was 24 years old. He had grown up on a colony world. He had been 10 years old when the silence began. He barely remembered a time when humanity spoke to the stars. "Warning them means talking to them," Wanjin said. "And we do not talk to people who have already decided we should die." Dohyun went back to his station and said nothing more. But later that night, alone in his small quarters aboard the ship, he pulled up old news footage on his personal screen. It was from 32 years ago, the day of first contact. He watched crowds of people dancing in the streets of cities all around the world. He watched children holding signs that said, "Welcome to Earth," in a dozen alien languages. He watched a young woman, a diplomat whose name he did not recognize, standing at a podium with tears of joy in her eyes, saying that humanity's greatest adventure was just beginning. Dohyun stared at the screen for a long time. Then he turned it off and lay in the dark. He wondered if that woman had known what was coming. He wondered if anyone had known. And he wondered if the hope that those people felt on that bright day was real, or if it had always been a lie told by a galaxy that never intended to keep its promises. Outside his window, the stars were cold and silent. And somewhere in the dark, the Council's fleet was coming. The Council's survey fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the buffer zone near New Incheon, humanity's fourth colony world. 200 ships. Cruisers, destroyers, sensor platforms, and carrier vessels, all painted in the silver and blue of the Galactic Council's scientific division. On paper, they were here to conduct a stellar mapping survey. In reality, every ship was armed, every weapon was charged. The scientific equipment bolted to their hulls was thin cover for targeting arrays and shield generators. Keeper Seleth had designed this fleet to look peaceful and strike hard if needed. The fleet commander was a Valeth officer named Captain Rethis. He was a careful man, loyal to the Council, and confident in his mission. His orders were simple. Park the fleet within sensor range of New Incheon. Broadcast open communication requests on all frequencies. Force the humans to respond. Any response, whether words or weapons, would serve the Council's purpose. Rethis activated his communication array and began broadcasting. This is the Galactic Council survey fleet to the human colony of New Incheon. We are conducting a peaceful scientific mission in neutral space. We request open dialogue with your planetary authorities. Please respond. The message went out. Silence came back. On the surface of New Incheon, the colony's 4 million residents watched the sky. Long-range sensors had picked up the fleet before it even arrived. Screens in every home, every workplace, every school showed the cluster of 200 ships sitting just beyond the buffer zone. Fear rippled through the population. Parents held their children a little tighter. Workers paused at their stations and looked up. Then the planetary governor spoke. Her name was Unji. She was a small woman with a steady voice, and she had been chosen for this job precisely because she did not panic. Her face appeared on every screen on the planet. Earth sees them, she said. Earth is already here. Continue your lives. The colonists obeyed. They had been trained for this. Children went to school. Farmers tended their fields. Factory workers returned to their machines. The defense grid around the planet powered up to full capacity, its orbital platforms glowing with quiet energy. But not a single targeting system locked onto the Council fleet. New Incheon looked at 200 warships on its doorstep and carried on as if nothing had happened. Captain Rethis waited. 1 hour, 2 hours, 6 hours, a full day. He broadcast his message again and again. He tried different frequencies. He tried different languages. He even tried sending the message in old human English, thinking perhaps there was a translation problem. There was no translation problem. There was simply no reply. On the second day, Rethis reported to War Marshal Draven, who was monitoring the operation from a command ship several systems away. They are not responding, Rethis said. They have acknowledged our presence. Their defense grid is active, but they will not speak to us and they will not engage. Draven leaned back in his chair and thought. He was an old soldier. He had fought in 11 wars across 3 centuries. He understood aggression. He understood fear. He understood surrender. What he did not understand was indifference. Maintain position, he ordered. They will respond eventually. But they did not respond. Not on the second day. Not on the third. Not on the 5th. The Council fleet sat in the void and broadcast its messages into nothing. And slowly, quietly, the crews began to break. It started with small things. Officers snapping at each other over minor tasks. Crew members having trouble sleeping. A growing sense of unease that settled into every ship like fog. They were trained warriors. They knew how to face an enemy that charged at them with weapons blazing. They knew how to face an enemy that cowered and begged. They did not know how to face an enemy that simply did not care that they existed. On the 7th day, 3 captains in the fleet sent private messages to Rethis requesting permission to withdraw. They cited crew mental health concerns. Rethis denied all 3 requests. But he understood their fear. He felt it himself. Every time he looked at his sensor screen and saw the human defense grid humming calmly around New Incheon, not targeting him, not tracking him, just existing, He felt like a man standing in front of a sleeping predator and realizing that the predator was not asleep at all. On Earth, Sujin watched the data from her office in the Psychological Warfare Division and smiled. This was her design. Not the fleet, not the weapons, the silence. She had studied the Council's psychology for years. She knew that the Galactic Council had spent 12,000 years conditioning every species it encountered. Species that submitted were rewarded. Species that fought were crushed. Both responses gave the Council something to work with. Both responses were manageable. But being ignored was neither submission nor resistance. It was something the Council had no framework for. They are afraid, Sujin told Taeho during her evening briefing. Not of our weapons. They are afraid because they do not know what we want. A species that threatens them is predictable. A species that begs them is controllable. But a species that treats them as irrelevant? That breaks something fundamental in how they see themselves. They have always believed they are the center of the galaxy. We are showing them they are not. Taeho nodded. And the fleet? I give it 4 more days before they withdraw on their own. She was wrong. It only took 3 more days, but not for the reason she expected. On the 11th day, at exactly 0300 hours Galactic Standard Time, every sensor on every ship in the Council fleet screamed to life at the same moment. Captain Rethus leaped from his bed and ran to the bridge. What he saw on the sensor display made his legs go weak. 600 Earth warships had appeared in a perfect sphere formation around the entire Council fleet. They were everywhere, above, below, on every side. Each one was close enough to fire and far enough to maneuver. Their weapons were locked on. Every single Council ship had at least 4 targeting solutions painted on its hull. The formation was so precise, so mathematically perfect, that it looked like it had been carved by a machine. But that was not the worst part. The worst part was that these ships had not arrived. No engine trails. No energy spikes. The sensors had detected nothing. These 600 warships had been there the entire time, cloaked and invisible, watching the Council fleet from the moment it arrived. For 11 days, the Council's 200 ships had sat in the void, believing they were the threat. In reality, they had been surrounded from the first second. Rethus stood on his bridge and stared at the display. His hands trembled. His communication officer looked at him with wide, terrified eyes. "Sir," she whispered, "they are not hailing us." She was right. 600 warships, enough to destroy the Council fleet 10 times over, and not a single transmission. No warnings, no demands, no ultimatums, just 600 ships, sitting in perfect silence, with their weapons pointed and their engines cold. War Marshal Draven received the sensor data on his command ship, and felt something he had not felt in 300 years of warfare. Real, deep, primal fear. Not the fear of battle, which he had long ago learned to control. This was different. This was the fear of realizing that everything he believed about the balance of power in the galaxy was wrong. The humans had technology the Council could not detect. They had ships the Council could not see. They had been watching, silent and invisible, while the Council played its games. Draven sat in his chair for a long time. Then he gave the order. All ships withdraw. Immediately. Do not fire. Do not transmit. Just leave. The Council fleet turned and ran. Not a single shot was fired. Not a single word was spoken. 200 Council ships fled from the border of human space like animals running from a fire. And behind them, 600 human warships watched them go in absolute silence. On Valith Prime, Lenora received the report. She read it twice. Her hands, which had been steady through centuries of crises, trembled. She had sent a fleet to provoke a response. She had received one, but it was not the response she wanted. It was not anger or fear or even defiance. It was something far worse. It was proof. Proof that while the Council had been talking and planning and scheming, humanity had been building weapons the galaxy could not see, ships the galaxy could not find, and a military force that could appear from nothing and vanish into nothing. And they had done all of this without saying a single word. Lunora sat alone in her chamber and stared at the wall. The silence was no longer a mystery. It was a message, and the message was clear. Humanity did not fear the Galactic Council. Humanity did not hate the Galactic Council. Humanity simply did not need the Galactic Council. And for a civilization that had spent 12,000 years believing it was the center of the universe, that was the most terrifying thing of all. The retreat at New Inshan could not be hidden. Within hours of the Council fleet's withdrawal, sensor logs from dozens of sources leaked across the galactic extranet. Independent traders, neutral observation posts, even some of the Council's own officers shared the data with contacts outside the government. The footage spread like fire. 200 Council warships running from a border they had crossed uninvited, surrounded by 600 human ships that had appeared from nowhere. Every species in the galaxy watched, and every species understood. The Council had gone to intimidate humanity. Humanity had not even bothered to speak to them. The reaction was immediate. On the floor of the Galactic Council chamber, the Relathi Confederation's ambassador stood and demanded a full review of all Council policies toward humanity. The Relathi were a proud species, warrior poets who valued honor above all things, and they did not hide their words. "We were told humanity was dangerous," the ambassador said. "We were told they were aggressive and unstable. What I saw in those sensor logs was a species that did not fire a single weapon. They did not issue a single threat. They simply showed us what they could do and let us leave. That is not aggression. That is restraint. And I want to know what the Council has done to earn such cold restraint from a species that once came to us offering friendship." The Orvani Republic went further. They formally withdrew their ships from all military operations near human space and declared that they would not participate in any action against humanity until a full investigation was conducted. 6 smaller species followed the Orvani within days. Lunora's coalition, which had held the galaxy together for 12,000 years, was cracking. In her private chamber, Lunora met with War Marshal Draven. The old soldier stood before her with his arms at his sides and his face hard as stone. "The fleet performed as ordered," he said. "We approached, we broadcast, we waited, and when the humans revealed themselves, I ordered a withdrawal to preserve our forces. I will not apologize for that decision." "I am not asking for an apology," Lunora said. "I am asking for a solution." "There is no military solution," Draven said flatly. "Their stealth technology is beyond anything we have. We cannot fight what we cannot see. And even if we could see them, the force they deployed at New Inshan was only a fraction of what they have. My intelligence staff estimates they have at least 3,000 capital ships. We cannot win a war against them. Not now. Perhaps not ever." Lunora stared at him. In 300 years, she had never heard Draven admit that any enemy was beyond the Council's reach. The fact that he said it now, calmly and without emotion, told her everything she needed to know about how bad things truly were. Ambassador Torin requested a private meeting with Lunora. He had served the Council faithfully for decades. He had carried their messages to humanity 14 times. He had always believed that he was working toward peace. But the retreat at New Inshan had planted a seed of doubt in his mind, and that seed had grown into something he could no longer ignore. "I want to see Amendment 1172, he said. Lunora's face did not change. "That document is classified." "I know it exists." The Rylothi ambassador referenced it on the chamber floor. Half the galaxy is talking about a secret council directive regarding humanity. I have spent years carrying your messages to their border. I deserve to know what was being done while I was playing the fool. Lunora looked at him with those ancient black eyes. You are a diplomat, Torin. Your role is to deliver messages, not to question the wisdom of those who write them. Torin left the chamber. He had his answer, not in what Lunora said, but in what she refused to say. On Earth, Tejo gathered his war council for a strategic assessment. Hana presented the intelligence picture. The council was now divided into 3 factions. Lunora's loyalists still controlled the military infrastructure and the bureaucracy, but their support was shrinking. The moderates, led by species like the Rylothi and Orvani, wanted genuine reform and honest engagement with humanity. And then there were the frightened, the dozens of smaller species who simply wanted to stay as far from Earth's attention as possible. The galaxy was splitting apart, and it was splitting along the exact lines that Sujin had predicted 2 years ago. Tejo looked at Sujin. What do you recommend? Sujin stood and walked to the display screen. She had changed in the years since she left the diplomatic service. Her face was harder, her eyes were colder. But somewhere beneath that cold surface, the woman who had once believed in the galaxy was still alive. She had not killed that part of herself. She had simply put it to work in a different way. We have been silent for 6 years, she said. The silence has done its job. The council is fractured. The galaxy is questioning everything it has been told about us. Now it is time for the next phase. We will not break our silence with words. We will break it with actions. She presented Operation Quiet Dawn. It had 3 components, all designed to be executed simultaneously. The first component was a gift. An unmanned cargo drone would be sent to the Rylothi Confederation's border. It would carry a data core containing complete blueprints for human agricultural technology. Systems that could increase food production by 400% on any world. There would be no message attached, no terms, no conditions, just knowledge, freely given, left at their doorstep like a gift from a neighbor who never knocks. The second component was a rescue. A human medical frigate would travel to the outer colonies of the Orvani Republic, where a devastating plague had been killing thousands for 2 years. The Council had refused to send help, calling it an internal Orvani matter. Earth scientists had developed a cure. The frigate would arrive, deploy the cure, and leave. No communication, no fanfare. Just help, given without being asked for, and without any expectation of return. The third component was the truth. Earth would transmit a single unencrypted data packet to every species in the galaxy simultaneously. The packet would contain the full, unredacted text of the Containment Directive and Amendment 1172. Every line about economic manipulation, military restriction, engineered border wars, and the final authorization to destroy Earth and all human worlds. Tejo approved the operation. 48 hours later, all 3 components were executed at the same moment. The galaxy broke. Species that had trusted the Council for thousands of years read the Containment Directive and understood that they had been governed by liars. The Rylothi ambassador stood before the Council chamber and read the directive aloud, line by line, while Lunora sat in silence. 12 more species demanded her resignation. Riots broke out on 6 Council worlds. The extranet was flooded with fury and grief and disbelief. And quietly, without any announcement, the Rylothi opened the data core from Earth. Their agricultural scientists studied the blueprints and confirmed they were real. The technology worked. Humanity had given them a gift that would feed billions. And in the Orvani Republic's outer colonies, the plague stopped. The human cure worked perfectly. Orvani doctors wept as patients who had been dying began to recover. The medical frigate was already gone by the time they thought to look for it. 3 days after Operation Quiet Dawn, Keeper Seleth was found dead in her quarters on Valeth Prime. The official report said natural causes. Nobody believed it. Everyone understood that someone in the council had silenced the woman who wrote the containment directive, hoping to bury the evidence. It did not work. The evidence was already everywhere. War Marshal Draven contacted Lunora one final time. He stood in his command center, surrounded by officers who had served under him for centuries. "I have fought for the Council my entire life," he said. "I have killed for the Council. I have watched worlds burn in the Council's name. But I will not commit genocide for the Council. If you order an attack on human worlds, I will refuse. And my fleet will refuse with me." Lunora was alone. Her allies were gone. Her secrets were exposed. Her military commander had turned his back. The empire she had maintained for centuries was falling apart, not because of war, not because of invasion, but because a species she had tried to silence had simply told the truth. And then Torin made his choice. He stole a shuttle from the diplomatic hangar on Valeth Prime. He flew alone, with no escort, no weapons, and no authority. He pointed his ship toward Earth, and opened a channel that anyone could hear. "My name is Torin," he said. "I come with nothing. I have no authority. I have no mandate. I only have the truth. I did not know what was being done in our name, and I am sorry." The message reached Earth. Teho listened. Hana listened. Sujin listened. The room was quiet for a long time. Then Sujin spoke. "He is not lying. I spent 8 years reading the body language and speech patterns of every species in that council. He is telling the truth." Teho nodded. He gave an order to his communications officer. For the first time in 6 years, a human voice spoke to the galaxy. It was not a speech. It was not a declaration. It was not a threat or a promise or an explanation. It was 2 words, transmitted on an open channel to Torin's shuttle. "Come forward." The galaxy heard those 2 words and held its breath. Behind Torin, the council was tearing itself apart. Ahead of him, the species that had shaken the galaxy with its silence had finally chosen to speak. And the 2 words they chose carried more weight than 12,000 years of council speeches, because they were not an offer of peace or a demand for surrender. They were an invitation, simple and clear, from a species that had learned the hard way that words mean nothing unless they come from someone who has earned the right to speak them. Torin's shuttle crossed into human space on a cold Tuesday morning, Earth Standard Time. He had never been this far inside their territory. No alien had. The escort ships that flanked him were sleek and dark and moved without sound. They did not hail him. They did not give instructions. They simply appeared on either side of his shuttle and guided him forward, the way a river guides a leaf. He passed the defense grid first. Up close, it was even more terrifying than the sensor readings had suggested. Orbital platforms the size of small moons hung in perfectly spaced formations. Weapons arrays pointed outward in every direction, their barrels long and dark and still. Patrol ships moved in patterns so precise they looked choreographed. Everything was clean. Everything was quiet. There was no chaos here, no noise, no wasted motion, just power, enormous and patient, waiting behind a wall of silence. When Earth came into view, Torin pressed his face to the viewport and stared. He had seen images of the planet before, but images did not capture the reality. The blue of the oceans, the green and brown of the continents, the swirl of white clouds moving across the surface like living things. It was beautiful. And it was the world that the Galactic Council had authorized to be sterilized. The shuttle landed on a platform built into the side of a mountain on the Korean peninsula. Torin stepped out into cold air and thin sunlight. Human soldiers in dark uniforms stood in two lines, forming a corridor toward a heavy steel door set into the rock. They did not point weapons at him. They did not search him. They simply stood and watched with steady eyes as he walked between them and entered the mountain. The War Council chamber was deep underground. The walls were bare stone. The lighting was pale blue. A long steel table stretched across the room, and around it sat the people who had shaken the galaxy without speaking a word. Torin recognized none of them by sight, but he could feel the weight of the room. These were people who had made a decision that changed everything, and they had lived with that decision for 6 years without flinching. Tejo sat at the head of the table. He looked at Torin for a long moment. Then he spoke. His voice was quiet the way it always was, and Torin had to lean forward to hear him clearly. "We did not go silent because we were afraid," Tejo said. "We went silent because we learned that every word we spoke was being used to build a cage around us. Every treaty was a chain. Every handshake was a trap. So we stopped speaking and started building instead." He paused and looked at Torin with calm, steady eyes. "You are here because you are the first one of your kind to speak honestly. That earns you this. The right to listen." Tejo then explained Earth's position. He did not negotiate. He did not ask for opinions or reactions. He simply stated facts, one after another, in the same quiet voice. Earth would never rejoin the Galactic Council. The institution was corrupt. It had proven itself willing to commit genocide against a species that came to it in peace. No amount of reform could fix what was fundamentally broken. Earth would not seek revenge. It would not conquer. It would not subjugate. "We are not you," Tejo said, and those 3 words carried the weight of everything humanity had endured. Earth would form direct relationships with individual species, one-to-one, based on mutual respect and demonstrated good faith. No intermediaries. No council oversight. Any species that wanted to work with humanity could approach them honestly, and humanity would respond honestly in return. Any species that threatened human worlds would receive no warning, no ultimatum, and no second chance. "We have learned that lesson," Tejo said, and finally the silence was over. But Earth would never again speak simply to fill the void. Every word would carry weight. Every action would have meaning. Humanity had learned the cost of speaking to those who did not listen, and they would never make that mistake again. When Tejo finished, the room was quiet. Torin stood still for a long time. Then he asked one question. "What do you want me to tell the galaxy?" Sujin answered. She sat at the far end of the table, the same seat she had occupied 6 years ago, when she removed her diplomatic insignia and walked away from everything she had believed in. Her face was calm. Her voice was clear. "Tell them we were never their enemy," she said. "We were their equal, and they could not tolerate that." Torin nodded. He understood. He understood everything. On Valeth Prime, the Galactic Council held its final session under Lunora's leadership. The Great Chamber that had once held representatives from 43 species was less than half full. 23 species had formally withdrawn. Their seats were empty, their nameplates dark. The chamber felt hollow, like a body without a heart. Lunora stood at her podium and delivered a speech. She spoke of tradition and order and the necessity of strong governance. She spoke of ungrateful species who did not understand the sacrifices the Council had made for the greater good. She spoke for nearly an hour, and her voice was steady, and her words were polished and perfect. The few delegates who remained sat in their seats and stared at the floor, or at their hands, or at the empty chairs around them. The words meant nothing. They had always meant nothing. It had just taken 6 years of silence to make that obvious. 3 weeks later, the Rylothi Confederation and the Orvani Republic jointly announced the formation of the Free Worlds Accord. It was a new interstellar cooperative, built on principles that the Council had claimed to uphold, but never actually practiced. Transparency, sovereignty, mutual aid, no secret directives, no hidden agendas, no species would be classified or contained or managed. Every member would be an equal, and every decision would be made in the open. They publicly credited humanity's silence as the catalyst. For 6 years, one species showed the galaxy what it looks like to refuse a broken system, the Rylothi ambassador said. They did not fight it. They did not beg it to change. They simply refused to participate. And in doing so, they showed us that we had a choice too. The Accord formally invited Earth to join as a founding member. Tejo accepted, but he added a condition that surprised everyone. Earth would be a partner in the Accord. Not a leader, not a dominant force. A partner. The galaxy does not need another species telling everyone else what to do, he said. It needs species willing to stand beside each other. Aboard the ENS Silent Hammer, Do-Hyun sat in his quarters and wrote in his personal log. He had been 24 years old when this began. He was still young, but he felt older. He had watched the Council's fleet flee at New Incheon. He had watched the galaxy crack open under the weight of the truth. He had watched his species stand in silence for 6 years, and then speak 2 words that changed everything. He wrote slowly, choosing his words carefully. I used to think silence was cowardice. I thought that if you had the power to speak, you should speak. But I was wrong. Silence was the loudest thing we ever said. It told the galaxy that we did not need their approval. We did not need their permission. We did not need their validation. We just needed them to stop pretending they had the right to control us. And when they would not stop, we showed them what it felt like to be invisible. We showed them what it felt like to not matter. He closed his log and leaned back. Outside the viewport, the stars turned slowly. Captain Wanjin received orders to stand down from combat readiness for the first time in years. He sat in his command chair and let out a long, slow breath. His first officer, a quiet woman named Jiun, looked at him from her station. Do you think it is really over? She asked. Wanjin shook his head slowly. No, it is never over. But, for the first time in a long time, we get to decide what happens next. 1 year later, a joint human Rylothi science vessel launched from the orbital docks above New Incheon. The same colony that the Council had tried to provoke. The same world where 4 million humans had gone about their daily lives, while 200 enemy warships sat on their doorstep. The ship was called the Horizon, and its mission was exploration. Not conquest, not defense, exploration. It would fly beyond the edges of known space and into the darkness where no species had ever been. On the bridge, a human navigation officer and a Rylothi science officer sat side by side, charting a course into the unknown. They did not look like enemies. They did not look like conquerors. They looked like what they were. 2 people from different worlds who had chosen to fly together into the dark and see what was there. Back on Earth, Sujin stood alone in the War Council chamber. The displays were dark. The steel table was bare. On the far wall was the memorial. Every name was etched in stone. The colonists who died when alien raiders tested human borders. The soldiers who fell in skirmishes that should never have happened. The diplomats who spent years building bridges to nowhere. All of them remembered. All of them honored. Sujin reached into her pocket and pulled out her old diplomatic insignia. The small silver pin with 2 hands clasping across a field of stars. She had kept it all these years. She looked at it for a long time, running her thumb across its surface. Then she walked to the base of the memorial wall and placed it there, gently, among the names of the lost. She did not say anything. She did not need to. She had learned, along with the rest of her species, that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is let the silence speak for itself. Behind her, The insignia gleamed softly in the pale blue light. A small bright thing at the base of a wall of names. A reminder of who humanity had been before the silence, and a promise of who they would be after it. In offices and homes, and ships and stations across the galaxy, a news broadcast played. The anchor, a Rylathi journalist, read the closing line with a voice full of quiet wonder. For 6 years, humanity said nothing. And in that silence, an empire fell. A new alliance was born, and the galaxy learned a truth it had forgotten. The most dangerous species in the universe is not the one that threatens war. It is the one that no longer needs you at all. The broadcast ended. The galaxy was quiet. But it was a different kind of quiet now. Not the silence of fear, or anger, or defiance. It was the silence of a new beginning, wide and open and full of possibility, stretching out across the stars like the first breath of morning.